Hello, and welcome to another episode of Critical Weight Theory. And this is my little series that I'm calling Reply to. And this is my second reply to at Snoops TV, who commented on YouTube, "Oh my god, a video response, yeah. What did I do to warrant that? I seriously can't wait to listen to it, especially after the last one, that deafening attempt to turn a nonpartisan issue, the universal truth that our government blows billions of our tax dollars on garbage every year, into a political attack on the right. I'm sure this is going to be full of non biased, factual, correct information, and definitely not full of silly left wing talking point opinions of the poor." So that was a bit of a messy response. So it's a little bit unclear exactly like what point he was trying to make with that one, or she. I don't know actually the sex or the gender of this person, but it is apparently a real person and not a bot. So I guess I'll give some credit where it's due. But anyway, here's my response to that response. So that comment is doing three things at once, none of them substantive. The first thing is that there's mockery instead of engagement. The opening sarcasm about a video response is just preemptive dismissal. And frankly, I don't get what the shock or the goofiness is about, because obviously I'm a podcaster who makes videos, and it's not that unusual to respond to comments. I mean, people do it, especially when it comes to political commentary. You know, Farron Cousins does it on his YouTube channel. I've seen other YouTubers do that, so it's not really that unique of a thing to start with. So that's right, if you make a comment on one of my YouTube videos, you might maybe expect a response, especially now when I've started the series. But anyway, his uh his response signals, "I'm not going to engage and I want to look above it," which is not a rebuttal. If the argument is weak, if my argument is weak, it should be easy to point out where it's wrong. But this user didn't even try. So, also, point number two, calling it nonpartisan is actually a dodge. Yes, government wastes money is not a neutral truth floating above politics. The moment you talk about where the money goes and who benefits, it becomes political by definition. Budgets are actually policy choices, and there are distinctions between not only individual politicians, but between the two major political parties as a whole. So I wasn't saying waste does not exist. Of course, that'd be a ridiculous claim to make. I was pointing out a pattern: endless funding for the military, policing, and law enforcement, paired with claims of budget poverty when it comes to helping people. In other words, always money to hurt, never money to help. That pattern aligns overwhelmingly with right wing voting records, including, of course, if you want to say there are right wing Democrats, you would find that pattern there as well. And pointing that out isn't partisanship, it's just accountability. And by the way, the military is probably the biggest waster of tax dollars there is. It's almost undoubtedly the biggest waster, and also one of the biggest sources of environmental pollution and, of course, death and violence in the world. There is a lot of corruption in military spending, as has been well known for a very long time. Also, a great deal of corporate profit is involved in militarism, which is what led to President Dwight D. Eisenhower's famous 1961 warning in his farewell address about the powerful intertwined alliance between the U.S. military establishment and private defense industries, a relationship that grew during World War II and the Cold War. He warned about the military industrial complex, kind of a famous phrase by now. Eisenhower cautioned that this immense military establishment and a large arms industry could exert undue influence, potentially threatening democratic processes, economic stability, and national priorities if vigilance wasn't maintained by an informed citizenry. So, point number three, let's see here. Oh, yes, both sides' language is being used to avoid responsibility here. Framing this as government in general conveniently erases who votes to increase military and police budgets the most and who wants the least amount of accountability in those institutions, who cuts taxes and then cries deficit, who blocks social spending while demanding more money for war and for law enforcement. And also, again, when they talk about law enforcement, it's increasingly a partisan thing. They want the law to go after Democratic, liberal, and progressive voters, first and foremost. That is becoming especially clear in Donald Trump's second term. And, they're trying to increasingly purge society of non white citizens. That's what all these ICE raids are about. So it's not law enforcement in any sort of good sense. It's increasingly violent and outright fascist law enforcement. Basically, the worst kind of stereotypes about police and the military are being added to by the Trump administration. You know, before Trump, you could have still criticized those institutions, and of course you would have been right on the money in some cases, but now it's like the very worst features are almost becoming the main features, and it's increasingly tough to compare any police to, like, Andy Griffith or the cop who gets a cat out of a tree or something like that. You're going to have increasing violence because the far right loves violence. They do not love law and order. They don't like the idea of justice being blind. They want a justice system that serves far right, white, Christian nationalists. And everyone else, well, you better look out because they're actually targeting Native Americans now. And, the Pete Hogsbreath is in the military there, and he's trying to increasingly make it clear that they are more interested in being tough. And, the various government departments are basically purging elements that they consider woke, which just means acknowledging racism as a historical issue. So any sort of, museum display that criticizes racism or something like that is something that has to go. They want to purify history and make it look like we're nothing but the good guys. Meanwhile, of course, ICE is targeting anybody who is not white. Doesn't even matter if they're citizens or not. They're all being racially profiled, and that is, of course, happening right now. It's undeniable, and that's why a lot of citizens are pissed about it. So, if this YouTube comment was truly nonpartisan, this person would be willing to name names and voting records. They don't because the pattern is lopsided, and it clearly exposes the Republican Party as being more in favor of unaccountable military and police spending. Point number four, the user has been preemptively declaring bias, which isn't an argument, to be honest. It's not a good argument. Saying, I'm sure this won't be factual or unbiased before hearing it is an admission that facts aren't the issue. The goal is to discredit in advance so nothing can be answered afterward. And of course, in my opinion, I have answered fairly and accurately. So I don't know what the issue is. You're going to have to tell me what what I lied about, what I'm wrong about, what facts I've got wrong. If you can't do that, then what the hell am I supposed to do here, So this is not skepticism that is a compelling argument, it's avoidance. Okay, point number 5, the talking points of the poor jab really gives the game away. That line isn't subtle at all. It frames concerns about wages, housing, healthcare, or taxes as illegitimate because they come from the poor, those pathetic poor people. Well, I happen to not be rich, okay? So, of course, I am concerned about that. But I'm going to be noting this a lot here in these responses. Actually, one of my favorite political figures in history was actually born a prince, and his name was Peter Kropotkin. He was a Russian prince who basically renounced his position to become a revolutionary anarchist type, and he was basically a class traitor. So, oddly enough, some of my favorite, you know, political activists or philosophers of all time weren't necessarily in the poorhouse. So you don't need to be a poor person or anything like that in order to recognize the rottenness in the system. And Kropotkin did just that. And of course, there are other people. And in fact, as the right wingers love to note themselves, if you're an American citizen, you're still better off than a lot of other people in the world. So by that own standard, you could say that I'm not a poor person who's pointing out these things. I'm not necessarily jealous of the rich just because I criticize the rich, because compared to some other people in the world, guess what? I'm relatively well off. So that argument kind of falls apart if you think about it. It's really flimsy. And of course, it also overlooks the fact that, well, so what if I am poor? You know, does that mean I can't have a viewpoint? What if my jealousy of the rich, either real or imagined, what if there's some validity to that? What if there's a good argument to be made about how this system actually encourages people to be jealous and potentially vengeful against the upper classes? If the system itself is creating the rebellion that would ultimately seek to topple it, well, that's some instability built right into the frickin' system. So even that argument sort of challenges the legitimacy of the system itself, and it's an attempted dodge. But if you really think about it, it actually, in a weird sort of way, in a roundabout way, it actually serves as a critique of the system. And built into that is also the idea that, oh, if you're a poor person, you're not supposed to criticize the rich. Well, the rich actually have a lot of power. So if you're not allowed to criticize the powerful, the people who are movers and shakers of the economy, who actually kind of determine how life happens in the United States to a large degree, if you're not allowed to criticize them, then you're talking about an illegitimate society in general, where some people, if they have money, well, they're unaccountable. They can get away with any number of things they want. They can be corporate welfare whores, and they can abuse the citizens. They can pollute as much as they want. They can fire people for any flimsy reason. They could, abuse and harass their workers. They could even kill their workers. They could do any number of things and not be held accountable. So does that sound like I'm just being jealous of them, or does it sound like there's actually maybe some substantial issues actually involved in this? So his argument was not economic literacy or political literacy; it was contempt for the non-rich, and I I think it contradicts the earlier claim that this is about neutral waste. If the issue was really efficiency, the income level of the people affected wouldn't be treated as a punchline. Oh, those silly poor people. They goddamn idiots. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to actually look at the issues. That's why I've got to leave every major decision in the entire society up to the billionaires or maybe the 100 millionaires. I often correct people when they say it's all rigged for the billionaires. I say no, you might be able to be like 100 millionaire and still have the president's ear or something like that. It's not just technically for the billionaire class. And the response really offered no facts, no counter evidence, and no correction. It relied on, I don't know, some sort of vague sarcasm, false neutrality, and class sneering to avoid confronting a simple claim that the right consistently supports massive spending on military and police force and control of the population while pretending there's no money for anything that helps people live better lives. And I've said it before plenty of times. The standard right wing solution for any social problem is to bomb it, shoot it, beat it, throw it in a cell, or starve it of resources. They cannot do anything constructive, at least 98% of the time. No, I'm just making that up, of course, that statistical figure there, but that sure is what it seems like. So, calling all of this out isn't just bias. It's really just describing the record. It's telling it like it is, which is something that all these right wingers claim to love so much about Donald Trump. But when somebody actually tells it like it really is, well, then they hate that person's guts, or they think they're utterly ridiculous, like a goddamn clown. you know. So this, this was another just kind of I don't know, silly YouTube comment. It wasn't the most offensive comment that I could imagine, but it was still low effort. And wow, I've still found 17 minutes of material out of it, so there is that. Anyway, go ahead and make a comment on this video if you want. Maybe it would eventually end up being in an episode. I don't know. We'll see.